$600 billion, which brought up property prices and forced people to take on huge mortgages. Then, deficits led to increased interest rates. When will they reverse these inflationary policies and allow Canadians to keep their homes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The austerity preached by the Leader of the Opposition isn't going to help anyone access housing. That's why we're taking bold measures to build more housing, more affordable housing, and building it faster. We're working directly with municipalities all over the country to find ambitious solutions that meet communities' needs to solve the housing problems they're facing. We also have a housing accelerator fund in London and Vaughan and Hamilton, and we just signed a deal with Quebec. We'll continue to be there to help people. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After 8 years of this incompetent Prime Minister, Canadians are already experiencing austerity, whereas the government is living in abundance. And it's not worth the cost. I met a worker at the C-SPAN worksite who bought a normal house in Vancouver, but because of increased interest rates, they're paying over $7,000 for the mortgage, and $4,000 of that is interest. Will the Prime Minister finally put an end to their inflationary policies so that this worker can keep their house? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. What the Leader of the Opposition does not seem to understand, Mr. Speaker, is that the cuts they're proposing won't help those workers, won't help Canadians. We're in favour of helping Canadians with investments and agreements with municipalities to create more housing while ensuring that we keep the deficit as low as possible in the G7. We have the best GDP to debt ratio, and we've kept our AAA credit rating. Canadians are entitled to know if the Leader of the Opposition wants to cut, and if he does, is he going to cut daycare? Is he going to, where else is he going to cut? Because those are programs that he's campaigned against. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Long, miserable years. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He massively increased the money supply by $600 billion, inflating housing costs by over 100%. That forced one C-SPAN shipyard worker I met last week to buy a normal house for over $1 million. And now interest rates have gone up because of inflationary deficits, something the Prime Minister promised would not happen. And he's forced to pay $7,500 a month on his mortgage while supporting his 3 kids. Will the Prime Minister reverse his inflationary spending so that this gentleman and his wife and 3 kids can afford to keep their home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
One thing is clear, the cuts, the austerity that are proposed by the Leader of the official opposition would not help that family, would not help Canadians from coast to coast be able to afford a new home. That is exactly, or the homes they're living in even. That is why we're continuing to work right across the country to bring forward ambitious and community-specific solutions to the housing problems they're facing. We've signed housing accelerator fund agreements with London, with Vaughan, with Halifax, with Hamilton, with the province of Quebec, with more to come, Mr. Speaker. The cuts he's proposing won't help Canadians. Our investments, done responsibly, will continue to help Canadians.
That's right. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Middle-class shipyard worker paying $7,500 a month on his mortgage is living austerity now. The Prime Minister is talking about is abundance for government and austerity for working class people who must carry him and his overpriced bureaucracy around on their backs. Mr. Speaker, this gentleman has 3 kids to raise in their adolescence, paying for their sports while keeping a roof overhead. How does he expect them to pay $7,500 a month to fund his overpriced interest rates that result from his deficits?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is proposing to cut spending. Well, the reality is we have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the best debt to GDP ratio in the G7, and we've preserved our AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. We are fiscally responsible as we support people with things like the grocery rebate, with investments that are bringing down inflation, working with the different grocery companies. But the reality is Canadians have a right to know which programs he'd be cutting. Would he be cutting childcare for families? Would he be cutting dental care for kids? Would he be cutting pensions for seniors? Because, Mr. Speaker, he has campaigned against all three of those measures for Canadians. That's right.
Before the honourable Leader of the Opposition asks this question, I'm going to ask members please to restrict your comments to the time that you are recognized by the chair to have the floor. The honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. And what would I cut? I'd start with the $54 million ArriveCan app that is now under police investigation. And then I'd get rid of the $35 billion infrastructure bank that pays bonuses but hasn't completed a single infrastructure project, Mr. Speaker. And why don't we throw in the $100 million plus contracts to McKinsey, a company that helped cause the opioid crisis. But speaking of all the waste that he forces on Canadian taxpayers, when it comes to the ArriveCan app, which is now under police investigation, he covered up a previous bad behavior under SNC Lavalin. Will he at least cooperate with the RCMP investigation into the ArriveCan app?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, we see the Conservatives are all about cuts, not about investing and building a stronger future. The reality is, I recommend, Mr. Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition take a ride on the great REM in Montreal that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank helped build, which has helped thousands of Canadians see being part of the future in a responsible way. We're going to continue to build a stronger future for Canadians by making the right investments, by keeping fiscally responsible, by staying away from the kinds of cuts that the Conservatives continue to put forward.
Once again, I'm going to ask colleagues to please restrict your comments to when you are recognized to have the floor. L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly.
J'ai posé dans un esprit.
Yesterday, in a spirit of cooperation, I asked a question or a few questions of the Deputy Prime Minister that perhaps were unexpected. So the answers weren't satisfactory. So I would ask the Prime Minister this time about the group of 5 countries made up of the United States, Germany, Italy, France, and the UK have given themselves an ability to intervene politically and diplomatically. And Canada is not part of it. Yesterday, I asked the Deputy Minister if the Prime Minister talked to President Biden in order to be added to that list. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, like our colleagues know full well, Canada is working very closely with its allies throughout the world. We were involved in a call with foreign ministers of the G7 this morning in order to make sure that assistance gets into Gaza and that we are there to provide humanitarian assistance. This is a terrible crisis occurring in the region. We've evacuated Canadians and we've worked with our allies. We continue to push for evacuating civilians in affected areas, and we will continue to work with all our allies and to maintain a conversation with all of them. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly.
C'est beaucoup humanitaire.
Mr. Speaker, humanitarian assistance is important, and of course the international community has to mobilize for it. But it's not just about humanitarian assistance. The Prime Minister's answer is long, and that means no. That means that he's not going to be part of the group that has a great deal more influence than even the G7 in the current context. Yesterday, I proposed that the Prime Minister get together with party leaders so that we would have a confidential meeting in order to be better coordinated and to establish a consensus regarding this crisis that is more important than our debates or political issues here. Will that happen, Mr. Speaker? The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président, c'était effectivement une très bonne.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that was a very good suggestion. I asked my team to follow up, which they're going to be doing in the coming days, to make sure that various party leaders have access to necessary information. This is a moment for Canadians to be united. I know that people are worried. Various communities of the country are scared for their loved ones. They're also frightened for their children and their communities. We are here to reassure people. I think all 338 MPs have a responsibility to reassure people, to emphasize on the shared values that we have, and to be there for each other. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Hundreds of Canadians are stranded in Gaza. We have heard the distressing accounts of Canadian citizens who have been told to evacuate but have nowhere to go. Water, food, and medicine is running out. Canadians waiting at the closed Rafah border crossing are pleading for help, saying they're looking for any glimpse of hope. Lives are at risk. We cannot abandon them or the hostages. Will the Prime Minister ensure today that all Canadians can safely get out of Gaza?
Mr. Speaker, for the past 10 days, we have been directly focused on the safety of Canadians and indeed all innocents in the region. We have effectively airlifted out about over 1,300 people from Tel Aviv. We've seen bus and more buses to come out of the West Bank, and we continue to be extremely concerned about the hundreds of Canadians and their families in Gaza. We're working with the international community. I spoke with President al-Sisi about the Rafah border crossing. I spoke with many allies about that. We are working directly to ensure humanitarian corridors into Gaza and exit for civilians, particularly foreign nationals like Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Nous devons mettre un terme à la mort.
We must put an end to death and destruction in Israel and Palestine. We've just found out that it's possible that a hospital was hit in Gaza. New Democrats have asked for hostages' freedom and a ceasefire. Some Liberal MPs have also asked for a ceasefire, but the Prime Minister has not heard these calls. Does the Prime Minister agree that Canada should demand hostages' freedom and a ceasefire? The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Monsieur le Président, nous réclamons la libération des...
From the beginning, we've been demanding hostages' freedom. It's a horrible situation. We also call for maintaining international law and provide humanitarian assistance. It's important to help civilians. News regarding the hospital are absolutely terrible and unacceptable. We're going to make sure we can do everything we can in order to ensure that international law is respected, for civilians to be protected, and for hostages to be freed.
Député de Thornhill.
Remember the middle class and those working hard to join it. Remember, we'll take on more debt so Canadians don't have to. Remember, the budget will be balanced in 6 years. Those were the promises. And after 8 years, there's no talk of the middle class anymore because they're underwater from Liberal NDP spending sprees. And now the budget will be balanced in the year never. So has the finance minister completely lost control of the books? Or is there a new promise this week about when she will actually stop the inflationary spending so that Canadians don't lose their houses?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I am always happy to work for the middle class. We are always happy as a government to continue supporting the middle class. The Conservatives on 2 occasions voted against a tax break for the middle class. And now they pretend to care about the middle class. Mr. Speaker, I'm confused. You see, we have legislation on the floor of this House that is going to stabilize grocery prices and that is going to help build more homes from coast to coast to coast in this country. I know many Conservatives are voting in favor of that bill. They've said so publicly. What about the leader of the Conservative Party? Will he vote for this bill?
L'honorable député de Thornhill.
Speaker, it's not working. It's been 8 years, and the only thing that Canadians know after 8 years is that the Liberals are not worth the cost. Canadians are struggling, and the Liberals are continuing their ballooning deficits that drive up inflation. Even the Liberals are saying that deficits increase interest rates. So will the Finance Minister finally confirm for Canadians that she will balance the budget in a specific year so that interest rates can come down and that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I would remind my colleague opposite that Canada continues to have the lowest deficit among all G7 countries. I'd also advise her, in case she missed the news this morning, that Statistics Canada has announced that inflation has actually come down in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, that is because our plan is working. But we know that Canadians still need support, which is why before this House, at this very moment, we have legislation that will help to reduce grocery store prices for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, why is it that the Conservatives are playing partisan games with the interests of Canadians and of the middle class?
The Honourable Member for Kenora.
8 years of the NDP Liberal government, the federal deficit is projected to exceed $46 billion this year, according to the independent budget officer. This spending is driving up interest rates and mortgage costs to the point where people are worried that they won't be able to afford it to keep their roof over their head. Mr. Speaker, we know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost, so when will he finally stop his inflationary spending and reduce the deficit so that Canadians can afford to keep their homes?
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
coming from the Conservatives. But I wonder if they are keeping up with the announcements made by our government. You see, just about an hour ago, we announced new measures that will help to reduce costly banking fees that Canadians have told us are a very real irritant for them. This is real support to Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We're going to enhance low-cost and no-cost checking accounts for Canadians. We are going to make sure that Canadians get repayment relief from their banks, Mr. Speaker. We are acting every single day in the interest of Canadians in order to help them meet the moment, Mr. Speaker. Where are the Conservatives? They're nowhere.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, after 8 years of this government, it is too little too late for many struggling people. But we know that this government's housing crisis brings with it a generational divide. According to a survey reported on by BNN Bloomberg, nearly 70% of young people have chosen to delay their home purchase, Mr. Speaker. Now, why is that? Well, they cite rising interest rates and rising home prices. That's why people are overpaying for an individual room or simply just trapped in their parents' basement. So I ask again, Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the government stop their inflationary spending so that Canadians can afford a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
An example of recklessness is the Conservative record on housing. $300 million spent when they were in power on housing, less than 100 homes built, Mr. Speaker. What's also reckless, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that they would abandon municipalities who want to build more homes. We've put on the table $4 billion for municipalities to assist them to build more units. The City of London, Hamilton, Vaughan have signed on, Mr. Speaker. Other communities are coming to the table. Halifax is there. We have more to do. We're serious on this agenda. They have no plan on this issue.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the economic situation in Canada is worsening, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. It's hard to believe that it could get worse, but it is. More spending and a bigger deficit than planned. Nothing new with this government, which knows just one thing: wasting taxpayers' money. Will the government finally admit that the budget won't balance itself, take responsibility, and stop its inflationary deficits? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Conservatives have failed to see what we've introduced. We have an action plan to stabilize the situation for Canadians. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that grocery stores are accountable to Canadians, which the Conservatives would never have imagined. Secondly, We've helped consumer groups, one thing that the Conservatives never would have imagined. The Conservatives, who are doing nothing, will they finally help Canadians by voting for C-69 once and for all?
Colleagues.
Colleagues.
L'honorable député de Charlebourg.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles.
Président, qu'est-ce que le ministre a à répondre?
What does the minister have to say to Montrealers who have to earn $116,000 a year if they want to buy a home? Elsewhere in Canada, in Toronto, $235,000, or Vancouver, $250,000. It's easy to see why people have lost hope of becoming a homeowner one day. The government abandoned the middle class and our youth. Today's situation's the proof. Will the government commit to ending its inflationary spending so that our young people can one day hope to become a homeowner? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Monsieur le Président, je peux vous dire, pour avoir parlé à...
Having spoken with Montrealers, I represent a riding in Montreal. Montrealers are scared that the Conservatives are going to cause us to lose ground. The cuts we can expect from Conservatives, cuts into pensions for our seniors, cuts for families who have young families.
Chers collègues,
Dear colleagues,
c'est important que juste...
please, it's important for one person to speak at a time, and that person is the one recognized by the Speaker. I will ask the Parliamentary Secretary to restart her answer from the top.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to answer my colleague because I know full well that Montrealers are scared that we're going to lose ground with the Conservatives because they're going to cut into pensions for our seniors. They'll cut into subsidies for families, and they certainly will cause us to lose ground when it comes to the environment and fighting climate change. I'm surprised that a Conservative colleague is talking to me about Montreal because Montrealers right now, I can tell you, they're not interested in the Conservatives' plan. The Honourable Member for Jonquière.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, the CEO of Suncor said this summer to his shareholders that he's tired of fighting climate change. Oh, poor him. According to him, Suncor is too focused on the energy transition and needs to refocus on selling oil and gas. More oil, more pollution. The federal government gave $83 billion in subsidies over the last two budgets to help oil companies to pollute less. Suncor admits that it doesn't even want to try to pollute less, but they still want taxpayer money. Glutton one day, always a glutton. Sincerely, when's the federal government going to cut public funds for Suncor? I would like to ask members once more to not speak when someone has the floor here in the House. I have comments for the member for Calgary Signal Hills specifically. I can hear him in the chamber. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have good news for my colleague. We've already cut subsidies for oil and gas. We're the first G7 country to do so, and we did it 2 years earlier than our other partners, but we went even further. We've committed to eliminating public funding, which no other G20 country committed to. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the CEO for Suncor doubled down in committee yesterday. According to him, the energy transition is ineffective. You'd think that members would have put pressure on, but no, the Conservatives defended him and prevented me from asking questions. They Not only did that, but there's a Conservative that apologized to Suncor on behalf of all Canadians, and the Liberals, they never questioned their subsidies, even if Suncor is planning to produce more oil and pollute more. Mr. Speaker, are the Conservatives and the Liberals on the oil and gas lobby registry? The Honourable Minister. I have more good news for my colleague. We set up measures to make sure that the oil and gas sector does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change in Canada. Regulations to reduce methane emissions by 40% by 2025, and that's going to be 75% by 2030. That's one of the most ambitious targets in the world. Soon, we've got a regulatory project to limit greenhouse gas emissions for the oil and gas sector, and we are the only oil-producing country in the world to do that. We are committed to fighting climate change and to fighting with the Canadian public to do so. The Honourable Member for L'Avignon-Matane, Lamitis-Matane-Matapédia. S&P Global thinks that Canada is going to be one of the drivers of oil production around the world in 2024 with 5.3 billion barrels of oil that they want to produce. Canada is going to be one of the main sources of increasing the worldwide offer for oil. With the support of Liberals and Conservatives, it's not just fighting climate change, efforts to fight climate change that oil companies are threatening, it's planetary goals that they're threatening. These two parties finally understand that Canada is the driver of a train that's going straight into the wall. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have more good news for my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois. From 2019 to 2021, our greenhouse gas emissions went down by 50 million tons. That's the equivalent of pulling off 11 million cars from our roads. And my honourable colleagues on the Conservatives don't seem to understand that we are committed to fighting climate change, to developing an economy that's going to be there for decades to come and create thousands of jobs throughout the country.
L'honorable député de Haldeman-Norfolk.
Every day I hear from Canadians that after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, they are unable to pay their bills. Recently, Rob wrote to me telling me that he can barely afford his mortgage payments. And so he and his wife have started to sell off their personal possessions to pay their monthly bills. Wow. He realizes that this Prime Minister just isn't worth the cost. When will this Prime Minister stop his irresponsible spending, which is driving up inflation, driving up interest rates, so that Canadians can afford their homes again?
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The housing crisis, as we know, is underpinned ultimately by a crisis in supply or the lack thereof. What this government is doing is partnering with municipalities across the country. For federal dollars, municipalities have the chance to build more. In London, for example, 2,000 more units of housing will be built in exchange for a $74 million investment. What we've done also is put forward Bill C-56, which, if you look at it, it's a serious bill that removes the cost of taxes, of GST specifically, for rental construction. They have nothing to say on that.
Here. The Deputy de Haldeman-Norfolk.
The housing crisis is directly related to the inflationary spending. This inflationary crisis is also impacting on communities all across this country, which are losing volunteers. Specifically, some volunteer firefighters have told me that they are unable to afford their mortgages. So they've stopped volunteering and they've taken on second and third jobs just to make ends meet. When will this Prime Minister admit that after 8 years of this government, they've failed Canadians and they're just not worth the cost?
L'honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it terrifies me to think of the reckless cuts that these Conservatives would make on the backs of Canadians. We've supported families with our national $10 a day early learning and childcare program, saving families hundreds, as well as the Canada Child Benefit. The best part, empowering parents, empowering mums and dads to get back into the workforce, giving them economic independence and contributing to our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of Liberal governance, after 8 years of irresponsible governance, and higher inflation that's leading to higher rates for mortgages, the Deputy Prime Minister proudly said that they would balance the budget in 2028. 6 months ago, no more plan for that. That promise never materialized. Last week, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that the next deficit would be even higher than the 16% forecast. Are the Liberals aware that their management is entirely irresponsible and it's hurting all Canadians? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a great deal of respect for my Conservative colleague. I would like to rectify something. Today, it was confirmed by Statistics Canada that inflation has gone down in Canada. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to his questions, I would also like to note that our government is going to provide an update, provide the fall economic update soon. It's coming soon, as you know, Mr. Speaker, and we will have the numbers available and he'll be able to analyze them and I'll be happy to answer his questions.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. That's not the problem, Mr. Speaker. Last year, they said they would get rid of the deficit, but that's not true at all. There is a reality that's affecting more and more young Canadians, and that is anxiety. Today, in a Quebec newspaper, the Journal de Montréal, it said that 61% of young people fear that they will never be able to own a home. According to Claude Pinard, the head of Montreal's United Way, many young people say to themselves, we'll never be able to buy. Mr. Speaker, to be young and forced to give up on your dreams is beneath us here in Canada. Is the Liberal government aware of the mess it has created after 8 years of uncontrolled spending? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have a great deal of respect for my colleague for Louis Saint Laurent, but you know what's causing anxiety among young people? It's the idea of the Conservatives forming government, the cuts, and more cuts. That's what people are afraid of, Mr. Speaker. That's what they don't get. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we understand that you need to invest in Canadians, in the economy, and to fight climate change. That's what Canadians expect from responsible government. And the last thing they want, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservatives in office.
Colleagues. Chers collègues.
Colleagues.
The Honourable Member from North Island Powell River.
My region has seen the largest increase of unhoused people on record, 106% jump in the Comox Valley and almost 70% in Campbell River. This is a catastrophe. The Prime Minister says housing is not a federal responsibility as people and communities move beyond a crisis point. This while Conservative council members at Campbell River have begun targeting nonprofits who provide essential services to the unhoused. When are the Liberals going to be an actual federal partner and build people homes?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the record, not just in British Columbia, but across the country, this federal government has been a partner to, namely, not-for-profit organizations that are doing the outstanding work on the ground. The result is obvious. 69,000 people who were on the street, no longer on the street. They are housed now, Mr. Speaker, quite often with the wraparound supports that they need to transition to something better. Add to that 122,000 people who are very close to homelessness, who are no longer in that position. They are housed as well through the National Housing Strategy. Thank you very much.
L'honorable député de Cowichan-Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' out-of-touch plan of nicely asking rich grocery CEOs to lower prices hasn't worked. Wishing and hoping that rich CEOs will do the right thing won't help families put food on the table. And grocery prices are still going up after 22 months. Canadians expect action, but the Liberals are out to lunch, and the Conservatives, you are all words and have no real plan. When is the minister going to get real about helping Canadian families and support the NDP's plan to lower food prices?
Here, here.
L'honorable ministre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. Mr. Speaker, I can assure you there was nothing nice about my meeting with the 5 grocers in Canada, Mr. Speaker. I expressed to them the frustration of 40 million Canadians who are struggling to put food on the table, Mr. Speaker. And I asked them on behalf of all the Canadians to do their part to stabilize prices in Canada. Mr. Speaker, if all the members of Parliament want to do something to help Canadians, vote for C-56. That is that simple, Mr. Speaker. More competition, lower consolidation, and more food on the table for Canadians.
L'honorable député de Cloverdale, Langley City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadians want a strong healthcare system that allows them and their loved ones to get the care they need when they need it. Last week, our government signed the first bilateral funding agreement with British Columbia, investing more than $1.2 billion over the next 3 years to improve access to family health services, support our health workers, and increase mental health and substance use support in BC. Can the Minister of Health please update this House on how the recent agreement will help the healthcare system and impact the lives of British Columbians?
Welcome. We finally got this figured out.
L'honorable ministre de la Santé.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Cloverdale, Langley City, who continues to be a champion for better health and for health transformation. And he's absolutely right. Last week was a huge week for British Columbia and a huge week for Canada. And we saw the investment, yes, of $1.2 billion in collaboration over the next 3 years.
Just wanted to say hi, folks. I'm a little late getting in here. We had some major technical difficulties, but I hope you've enjoyed the show so far. But I will add some commentary now. You recognize this baggage? Yeah, it's Mark Holland again. Thanks for watching this morning. This afternoon, yeah.
Shore St. Margaret's.
After 8 years, the Minister of Industry has just admitted that 40 million Canadians are struggling to put food on the table. 8 years of out-of-control spending by the NDP Liberal government have caused that inflation. This harmful inflation has pushed up interest rates, doubling and tripling mortgage payments and rent. 90% of Maritimers are having to make tough choices between eating, heating, and paying the rent. When will the Prime Minister stop harming Canadians with his inflationary deficits and balance the budget to lower costs on Canadians?
Right. Did all of you notice the inflation rate in Canada was pegged at 3.8% today? Does anybody out there believe these figures? Or do you think they're cooking the books? Because how is it possible to have a 3.8% inflation rate when you know your groceries are going up like 10% every month and the price of gas continues to go up every week? This is impossible. 3.8%. This is like back in the 80s. Ridiculous. You know there's something terribly wrong going on here. And I want to thank you again for your patience. I'm using a new computer, and that's why we had some audio problems this morning. But anyway, I'm glad you had a chance to listen to the floor show. And that's what it is. Let's listen to a little more.
Food on their table. Melody Horton of Bridgewater had to sell her dream home because of the increase in her mortgage costs. She doesn't agree that with these Liberals that they've never had it so good. The new projected deficit of $46 billion for this year means higher cost, higher monthly payments for Melody and for all Canadians, including that Liberal minister's constituents. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop harming Canadians with his inflationary deficits and balance a budget to lower costs on Canadians?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what can we expect from the Conservative Party of Canada? Cuts, cuts, and more cuts. Being the minister responsible for Veterans Affairs, Mr. Speaker, when they were in power, they slashed our employees by 1,000. They cut 9 Veterans Affairs offices and 1 in Cornerbrook, Newfoundland. When we formed government, that was the first office that we opened, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize that our veterans need the help and they need the support, and we will be there for.
The only veterans the Liberal Party of Canada is interested in serving are Ukrainian veterans of the Waffen-SS. Remember that.
And his Liberal NDP coalition are not worth the cost. Reckless inflationary deficits have driven up interest rates, forcing landlords to raise their rents. They've had no choice. Ford's rent's gone up by 22% in a year. He's left with not a nickel to spare. Will the Prime Minister stop his inflationary spending to reduce interest rates to give renters like Ford a break on their rent?
Mr. Speaker, the poverty rate among seniors has gone down significantly since we formed government in 2015, and that's because we've increased the OES, it's because we increased the GIS. It's also because we reversed the Conservative policy of increasing the retirement age to 67. This is a policy that was not announced here in this chamber, nor was it announced in this country. It was announced by the Prime Minister the day in Davos at the World Economic Forum, where, Mr. Speaker, he also added in that speech, the former Prime Minister, that the Canada Pension Plan does not need to be changed. On this side of the House, we agree. The question is, do they?
I have no idea if Seamus or O'Regan is making all that up, if that's just more blarney from Seamus or not. But if Mr. Harper did make that announcement in Davos, he shouldn't have. And we're not going to defend that. Just like we still think here, probably had better not ever go to Davos because he's told his members and his cabinet, future cabinet members, that they're not to be there. But it's incredible hypocrisy because, of course, Justin Trudeau is a pawn of the WEF, as anybody can tell you. And it's clearly evident because he mouths the same talking points over and over again. No, can't stand this one. Oh, this one. Bebo. You know, this is a woman who's really has no credentials to be in cabinet at all, but they keep shifting her from one position to another, thinking she'll do no harm. Well, this could be good.
That was translated in Paris because the Quebec accent doesn't apparently travel well. And now they send a memo to their journalists reminding them not to refer to Hamas as terrorist. We know that Hamas's heinous attacks are terrorism. Journalists know it. They know how and when to use words, even the most sensitive ones. Will the minister remind CBC management that newsrooms must remain free of political and ideological influence?
This is a good question. Not the best question today. But they'll get a damn poor answer. Basically.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Clear. Hamas has been recognized as a terrorist organization and a terrorist group. We have said that repeatedly, and the Prime Minister has said that. but we also believe in an independent CBC. That is what the CBC is. It has been that way under Liberal and Conservative governments. Conservatives may want to meddle in independent journalism. They can't seem to keep their hands out of public institutions, but we will keep working hard to ensure that Canadians get access to it.
Now, is this guy a parody? He must be a parody of a Liberal parliamentary secretary. What a non-entity coming up and saying it's the other side that wants to interfere with independent journalism when it's Trudeau who's got 3 internet censorship laws. This guy is a disastrous speaker, by the way. I'm sure you've noticed that. It's only taken him 3 days to demonstrate how poor he is. He doesn't seem to have any sense of what his role is. He's always forgetting who's coming up with questions.
Colleagues, please, I do ask you so that we could have good decorum in this House. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has made it clear Hamas is a terrorist organization. We have said that. The Prime Minister said that. And we will keep saying that. But we will also keep on this side of the House working for an independent CBC that is well funded to do the good work of Canadians in providing quality journalism. This is, on this side of the House, a priority for us, as it is a priority for all Canadians. And if Conservatives have a challenge or others have a challenge with the CBC, they are welcome to write to the Ombudsman.
You're welcome to write to the Ombudsman. Well, we're welcome to defund the CBC with a new government. And that's what should have happened decades ago. It's redundant. At the very best, it's redundant.
The honourable member
It's
for Drummond.
dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
At its very worst.
The Conservatives might want to clap a little less loudly. We know that journalists have to be independent, and we want to protect that. And they know all about loaded terminology. They know how to describe what Hamas did on October 7th. That's their job. But for management to issue a directive is something else entirely. It borders on censorship. CBC management are themselves muzzling the press, and they're taking a position that enters into the political debate, which isn't their role. Of course, CBC management is independent, but I'd like to ask the minister, does she think that as a matter of principle, it's desirable for CBC management to interfere in the work of its journalists?
Obviously, the heritage minister's not in the House today. They got the underling to come up here. He's busy preparing the next internet censorship bill, which is coming through heritage again.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've always been clear. Hamas is a terrorist
What
group
is the Minister of Transport
that has
doing up on
committed
it?
many barbarian acts. That's got to be clear. And when it comes to the translation, obviously CBC
Came
is
down from the
arm's
hill.
length, but
Look, I mean,
this
dig that
can certainly be
hairstyle.
done. We can do a good enough job without having things translated in Paris.
Why did
when
he
it comes
stand
to
up
the
to answer
arts.
this question?
Pablo.
He just said, did you hear that? He just called him Pablo. Did you hear that? The speaker just referred to the Minister of Transport as Pablo. This guy is unfit for this job. And they tried to shut the sound off. Did you all hear that? Yeah, there goes the sound again.
The question from the honourable member. The honourable member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
After 8 long years, one would hope that a government figure out that sound, responsible, economic and monetary policy is key to keeping inflation low. Instead, inflation has nearly doubled what it should be, resulting in massive increases in food, heating, rent, and mortgages. Canadians living paycheck to paycheck recognize that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. And to make matters even worse, we have the NDP supporting this government's fiscal incompetence. So, Mr. Speaker, will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister start listening to Canadians, stop inflationary spending, and cancel the carbon tax?
Speaker, I'd like to thank the colleague for the question, but I'm really surprised that she's not talking about the historic investment that was done in her riding yesterday, Mr. Speaker. Umicore invested $3 billion, Mr. Speaker, in her riding, creating 600 jobs, Mr. Speaker, for young people to stay in her riding, Mr. Speaker. We are building the economy of the future. We are investing in electric vehicles. Mr. Speaker, she should be rejoicing that we're making smart investment to create growth in this country.
Okay, get that. They're making an investment in an electric vehicle, which is going to make it all better, because we've got so many electric vehicles right now that nobody wants to buy them, and they'll never get batteries for most of these electric vehicles. So this minister is clearly deluded.
Canada 58th out of 63 in its commitments. The job-killing No More Pipelines Bill C-69, coupled with the carbon tax, now quadrupled at precisely the time our energy would secure the world, lower emissions, and guarantee Canadians could eat, heat, and house themselves. Will this Prime Minister admit that after 8 years, his NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost?
Mr. Speaker, it really is shocking that Conservatives are claiming to be on the sides of Canadians and helping them with affordability when, Mr. Speaker, their very allies in the Alberta government, in the UCP, are trying to take the pension plans of Albertans out of the Canada Pension Plan to have a reckless, unstable Alberta plan. Mr. Speaker, while those Conservatives stand on the sidelines and do nothing, we're going to defend Canadian pension plans in Alberta and across the country.
Look at the doors, Randy, with that. Guys can come third.
The honourable member from Calgary Confederation.
The Supreme Court has verified what Conservatives have been saying for a long time, and that is that this Liberal government is out of line, out of step, and out of touch when it comes to respecting provincial jurisdiction. Their reckless spending is only outdone by their unconstitutional attack on Canada's energy sector, the very sector that we'll need to pay off Canada's debt. After 8 long, miserable years of this NDP government, Canadians know this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will this government for once work with Canada's provinces and industry and today commit to repeal Bill C-69?
Yeah, well, you can't tell the difference between the Liberals and the NDP. So I guess you could call it an NDP government. There goes the sound again.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ah.
You know, one of the very sorry things about the conversation that goes on coming from that side of the House is the complete rejection of the need to ensure we have a sustainable environment going forward. That the price of entry in terms of actually building a strong economy means actually having a view about environmental sustainability. When that party was in power, they gutted the environmental assessment process. They destroyed the faith that Canadians had that we were protecting the environment and we were respecting Indigenous rights. We have put in place better rules. We certainly respect the decision of the court, and we will be making the appropriate amendments to ensure the environment is protected and the economy moves forward.
Get it off the staff for Randy next.
Kelly.
You get the feeling that nobody really respects this guy as Speaker because he doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He stands up a lot, gazing around the house.
Honourable member for Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Happy to join the Minister of Small Business to kick off Small Business Week in Montreal, where we met amazing small businesses such as Camillette Jewelry, Unel, and Cookil. Les Délices Lafrenet, a small business must-try bakery located in
Oh,
my
dear.
riding, is one of the many businesses that form the backbone of our economy. Can the Minister of Small Business tell us how this government is supporting the hardworking, innovative, and diverse entrepreneurs across our country
Oh,
and
you
who
love that one?
represent 98% of our businesses in Canada?
Don't you love these softball questions? These are for backbenchers who get one moment to shine every 3 months. And this was her big chance to do that. And they get to say, well, how wonderful the minister is. And the minister has to agree. I am that wonderful. And anyway, here she's lauding herself in the Liberal Party right now. Thank you very much. Okay. Is it time for another real question?
Député de Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Media reports reveal the RCMP couldn't pursue their criminal investigation against this prime minister and his SNC-Lavalin scandal because he was hiding secret documents from the federal police. If any other Canadian hid documents from the RCMP, they'd end up in jail. But after 8 years of this Liberal NDP government, this prime minister thinks that he's above the law, and Canadians know that he's not worth the cost. So what are the documents that are so damning that this prime minister is hiding them from the RCMP, and why are the NDP trying to help them get off the hook?
That was a good question. At least it raises a real issue.
Mr. Speaker, as the RCMP have confirmed, there is no active investigation. The case is closed, and authorities did not pursue any charges. My honourable friend knows very well, Mr. Speaker, the RCMP operations are conducted independently from government, and if he has operational questions for them, I would suggest he contact the RCMP.
All right, so we're reassured by Dominique Ladolt that everything is okay because there's no investigation. But that's what the question was about, because they didn't get the information.
Speaker, the Iranian regime supports Hamas and is responsible for death and destruction throughout the world. Yesterday, I asked the House to support my bill, C-350, to list Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization and therefore to shut down their operations in Canada. But Liberals refused. After 8 years, why are Liberals still refusing to hold this regime accountable? And why are they continuing to allow the IRGC to operate here in Canada? Here, here.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Speaker, it's well known that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism. We share the understandable concern of many Canadians with regard to Iran's role in the state sponsorship of terrorism. As my colleague knows, decisions around listing terrorist entities are based on the advice of our security professionals. I have obviously asked them to update this advice for the government, and we'll take all the necessary decisions as soon as it's appropriate.
Député d'Abbotsford.
Once again, we hear reports of Canadians crying out for help with their mental health, but being offered assisted death instead. This government refused to listen to mental health experts, to veterans, to disabled people, to Indigenous Canadians. They didn't listen to the family whose mother begged for help, but instead was euthanized before her kids could even say goodbye. Canadians overwhelmingly oppose this overreach on assisted suicide. Tomorrow we can end this madness by passing Bill C-314. Will the government give Liberal MPs a free vote?
Well, let's see what the answer is here. This is significant. I'll have a few more comments to make afterwards.
James.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. The mental health of Canadians is a fundamental priority for me and everyone in this chamber. The issue about MAID is a deeply personal and complex choice. It involves a balancing of protecting the vulnerable as well as the autonomy and freedom of choice of individuals. Those decisions need always to be made commensurate with the charter protections that exist. This is why we need to be vigilant in terms of ensuring our decisions are informed by evidence and expertise. Our government is moving to restrike the Joint Committee of Parliamentarians to deliver that expertise and that advice. I hope that official opposition can support us in that endeavor.
So you know the Liberals want to kill you if you have a mental health issue, because this is absolutely outrageous. This medical assistance in dying continues to be a policy in Canada, a program in Canada that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This is euthanasia, bald-faced euthanasia, and it is wicked. And it's just part of the reason why the Trudeau government is one of the worst governments in democratic history. I don't know. Yes, another softball question for this half-witted minister, Champagne. Probably one of the worst examples of a cabinet minister who has ever sat in the front row of the House of Commons. But it goes to show you this response to medical assistance in dying, aka euthanasia, that the Liberals just want to keep expanding those who are eligible to be killed. And that's what it comes down to. If you're telling me mentally ill people can make a rational decision about whether they want to live or die, this is how everything the Liberals begin escalates into a monstrosity.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't a worker shortage. It's a respect shortage. It's a dignity shortage and a wage shortage. Will the Liberals implement a wage floor of at least $25 an hour for childcare workers now?
That's a real question.
Mr. Speaker, the people who take care of our children day in and day out deserve to be well respected and well compensated. Building out a national early learning and childcare system takes time, it takes effort, and it takes hard work with our partners. We need to attract, to retain our ECEs across the country. And to do that, we need them to have better working conditions and competitive pay. We've been clear with the provinces and the territories, our partners, that we are working towards that, and we expect that along with them. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Churchill-Kiwatinokaski.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for a wealth tax. Canadians for Tax Fairness reveal that most of us are taking key steps to tackle climate change. At least 90%.
That's somebody else that couldn't bother to show up for work today. Nikki Ashton. What? Yeah, keep taxing everybody. That's the answer. Why don't we tax the MPs some? That would be a good idea, especially the socialist ones. They should be willing to separate themselves from their paychecks for the common folk. Now, what in the hell is the Minister of Climate Change doing up answering this one today? Oh, you want to know what? They'll remember.
Of Canada. I agree, Mr. Speaker, with this NDP advisor. We are the first government in the history of Canada to take climate change seriously, which is why we've put forward a number of measures, more than 100 measures to fight climate change, and it's working. We've reduced emissions in Canada by the equivalent of removing 11 million cars from our roads. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
How stupid is
end
this
of question period today.
I mean, how incredibly stupid is it? It is amazing to me. Anyway, I want to say a few things. Thanks for bearing with me today. Thanks for watching. Do you believe Gilbo at the end there? Do you believe anybody could say, what are people going to remember about the Trudeau government? I mean, I'll tell you what they'll remember. They're going to remember euthanasia. They're going to remember a prime minister who did blackface, who wandered around the world making a fool of an imbecile of himself everywhere he went, who alienated everybody, who went to India twice and made a complete fool of himself. It once wasn't enough. He had to do it again. Who instituted euthanasia, as I said, and who is censoring everybody on the internet. That's what people will remember. Not that they had some stupid climate change fight going on. It's called a carbon tax, which is doing absolutely nothing to fight climate change. It's not reducing greenhouse gases at all. And if we want to accept that reducing greenhouse gases is somehow fighting climate change, then it's not fighting climate change, because Canada produces about 1% of greenhouse gases in the world. And even if we lived in caves, we would not make a dent in the so-called climate change problem. And Guilbeault wants to shut off the natural gas. He said that the other day. He wants to shut off all the power. He wants to shut off the gas pumps, because that's what it means to fight climate change. Eh? That's what he's all about. He is a Greenpeace activist who has been brought to Ottawa, put in a suit, put in cabinet, but he still looks like a clown, because that's all he has ever been. He's an activist clown who is an environmental extremist who doesn't care if Canadians starve and freeze, because it's all about the fight for climate change. This man is dangerous. He should not be a cabinet minister. He should not even have been elected to the House of Commons, but there's enough idiots out there who think he has something important to say. But we just witnessed today how little he has to say that means anything at all. Want to make an announcement too. If a lot of you who watch my show are aware that there was another march coming up this Saturday, 1 million March for Children, part 2, that has been canceled because of all of the division created by this war in the Mideast. I'm sad to say that, because it's tragic, because we were developing a religious harmony in this country that was directed at the Trudeau government, that was directed at woke politics, that was directed at gender ideology and specifically, but was going to be expanded to other projects that the Liberals are pushing on us and shoving down our throats. And this is very bad news. And there's nothing to rejoice about here, because Canadians need to fight the Trudeau government before he completely suppresses free speech, before we don't even have something called the right to free speech, before we don't even have the right to free assembly or protest, because he's taking all of that away from us, inch by inch, incrementally, and it's speeding up. So any protest is good, and we need to do that. So thanks for watching today. I appreciate your input. Thanks for your comments. And we'll be back again soon to bring you the news. And I'm probably going to do a broadcast later today about this issue. Thanks for watching. God bless you all.